Making everyone happy on vacation isn't easy, but you know what is? Going to Aruba. All you have to do is walk out your door to find pristine pools, relaxing white sand beaches, and an island teeming with outdoor activities that'll put a smile on any face. You won't just feel great, you'll all feel great, filled with a calmer, more peaceful vibe that radiates Aruba's warmth. And the best part is, it never fades. That's the Aruba effect. Plan your family trip at aruba.com.
One person would write down the 10 things that make them feel cared about. And then the other person would write down the 10 things that make them feel cared about and loved. And then you exchange lists. For 2 weeks, you have to look at that list and do something off your partner's list every day. Because what happens oftentimes is we forget that what makes us feel cared about isn't what really works for the other person. And when you start shifting and thinking about what you're offering, that can really help and foster connection.
Welcome to Season 6 of Flusterclux with Lynn Lyons, where we talk about a family's anxiety and all the big feelings, too. We tackle the serious stuff without being too serious, and I'm your co-host, Robin. I'm Lynn's sister-in-law, and I'm here to ask your questions.
And I'm Lynn Lyons. I'm an anxiety expert, speaker, mom, and author, and I've been a therapist for over 30 years. Parenting can be a Flusterclux, and I'm here to help you find your way. I'll give you concrete steps to take and the words to say.
I got to tell you, all week I've been thinking about that stat that you read about how many adults identify as lonely, which means this is a really common, pervasive cultural problem.
Right. It's over 60%. It's significant. And I think it's a lot more than people think. If we were to just do a random poll and say, how many adults do you think would identify themselves as lonely? I think that the actual number is very surprising to people.
Yeah, I think in this episode, it'll be fun to unpack some language and the way people interpret it too, because I think that we always talk about connection. And I think that when people don't feel connected, they will very likely feel lonely. It's sort of like an assessment of how connected do we feel or have we historically felt?
As we were talking about in our last loneliness episode, COVID was all about isolation, and it really increased the loneliness that people felt. And it's interesting because I wonder how much of that has sort of carried over. I was just listening to this conversation on some podcast, of course, that I don't remember, about the difference in offices now that COVID has moved through, and the change in office environments and what people are missing in that office atmosphere. And a lot of people are like, oh, I'm so glad I don't have to commute, and I'm so glad I don't have to go into an office, et cetera, et cetera. But then you look at the statistics about how many people meet their friends and meet their spouses at work. It's a pretty significant amount of adult interaction that has been removed.
Right. It is kind of weird to think about the fact that so many 20-somethings, from 25 to 30, they're having their early career experiences working from home, isolated with a computer.
Right. If I think back to my early working, I was working at an inpatient psychiatry unit. But nonetheless, we did things afterwards. We went for walks at lunch. I had a group of people who we had breakfast with before we went to work. And all of that is really not happening on a regular basis.
Yeah, in my early 20s, I was working in New York City, and we had a very strong friend culture where it was all about work and your work friends and your friends, but your work friends were who you spent a vast majority of your time with.
Yeah. Do you know has business travel gone back to what it was? I would think not. When I travel, the planes are always packed, but think of those business trips that you took or the time that you spent getting from one place to another with somebody in the car. I think of going to conferences with some of my colleagues where you were driving in the car and you were chatting about things and sharing things about your life and getting to know each other. All of that is really impeded now, I think.
We were talking about this, and you mentioned that maybe in the mental health space, that's an industry or a field where many people adapted very well to being virtual. But other industries that I'm connected to, their business travels through the roof because everyone's desperate for it. So again, I think that depends on what you do.
we adapted very well to being virtual in terms of being able to do our jobs, but a lot of therapists got rid of their offices. And so they are fully doing telehealth now, which means that people who worked in agencies or people who shared office space, like I work in my office by myself now, but I used to share office space with people. I had an office and my friend Gail had the office. And then there were some people who made dentures who had some other office space in our suite. That was interesting. But there were people around. You were engaging with people. You were having conversations and you were doing things together. You were eating lunch together. You were, like I said, going on walks together, traveling. It really is an interesting time.
When we think of loneliness now, I still am not sure that the episode we will discuss today would ultimately be that different if we had recorded this episode in 2019.
Yes, I think you're right. Because remember, as I talked about in the previous episode, loneliness is really defined as a perception. So there's situational loneliness where you move to a new city, you're living by yourself, you've gone through some sort of big change and you haven't made friends yet, and you're definitely lonely because you don't know people where you are. But the more chronic, sort of pervasive and probably more damaging type of loneliness is when you're around people, you just don't connect with them. And you have a perception that other people are connecting and engaging in relationships in a way that you can't, or a way that you don't know how to.
That's actually what I thought we could start with, because I think there are these patterns, these thought patterns that really contribute. So the one that you just mentioned, that's such a classic pattern of the parent in the carpool line. All the other parents are getting together and socializing, but me. So there's that exclusionary kind of dynamic. I also think that there's a dynamic where like nobody gets me. So you could be around people, but your sense of humor or what you're interested in, it just falls flat. So you could be in an environment where you feel kind of lonely because nobody gets me. And then what's another kind of pattern that people could repeat?
Well, similar to that is what we used to refer to as that you believe that you are terminally unique. Nobody gets you, but you don't really give anybody a chance to get you. So it's almost this like you pull yourself back and you say, it's not like you're stepping in and trying and then people are like, oh, she's weird or oh, she's not funny. You don't even try because you're sure that everybody is different from you. And it almost is sort of like there aren't people who think the way I think. There aren't people who are interested in doing the things that I'm interested in doing. And you don't give it a chance, which is how this loneliness thing tends to cycle. Because if you don't go out and have any experiences to dispute your perceptions, you and your perceptions hang out by yourself. And like we say in the depression world, right? You are not the best person to talk to you about you. So if you're lonely, you and your loneliness are not going to really get out there and take some risks and be vulnerable and share. You and your loneliness are going to stay alone. And that's one of the ways that it becomes so problematic.
Well, and that's also where we have a lot of people have those sticky thoughts. I don't know if thinking of what you call them, I don't know if this is repetitive negative thinking. That might be something different. But it's like if you sort of go to that place, because you can be in a school or in a family where other people just seem different than you.
Yeah. And I think that that's one of the things that when we talk about when adults are lonely, when they live adult lives that are filled with loneliness. And as I said before, it's one of the hardest things for me to deal with as a therapist. It is just so heartbreaking to me. But that oftentimes they will give me a history, a family history of feeling really lonely in their family. So not feeling connected to other people in their family, not having a loving relationship with parents, even in a big family where there's a lot of kids, and it doesn't mean that there's just, one parent who's working all the time and you're home by yourself, but not really able to feel connected in your family is a really strong pattern that predicts continuing to feel disconnected as an adult.
Let's unpack that after this break. We have a hydration agenda in our house that every morning we each fill up these huge water containers.
Well, I mean, hydrating is great and water is fabulous, but what if you can have something that gives you 3 times the electrolytes of the leading sport drink, plus 8 vitamins and nutrients, right? I mean, that just makes you feel better every day. Liquid IV is a really good option for us to stay healthier, to stay hydrated, and it tastes delicious. It's a sugar-free drink.
I'm really into the watermelon.
I like the lemon lime. That's my favorite.
I have a couple in my bag because they're so portable. I can give them to my kids as well after soccer practice. Everyone loves the way they taste, and it makes getting hydrated easy.
Well, and you and I are on planes. Having liquid IV as a way to stay hydrated when you travel, it's just so convenient. I have trouble getting in as much water as I should, and this is just a way to make it easier, and it's just so much tastier. And the things that are in liquid IV just make me feel good about drinking it.
However you hydrate, grab your Liquid IV Hydration Multiplier sticks, buy them in bulk nationwide at Costco, or get 20% off your first order when you go to liquidiv.com and use the code FLUSTER at checkout.
That's 20% off your first order when you shop Better Hydration today using promo code FLUSTER at liquidiv.com.
Lumen is the world's first handheld metabolic coach. It's a device that measures your metabolism through your breath. And on the app, it lets you know if you're burning fat or carbs and gives you tailored guidance to improve your nutrition, workouts, sleep, and even stress management. All you have to do is breathe into your Lumen first thing in the morning, and you'll know what's going on with your metabolism, whether you're burning mostly fats or carbs. And then Lumen gives you a personalized nutrition plan for that day based on your measurements. You can also breathe into it before and after workouts and meals, so you know exactly what's going on in your body in real time. And Lumen will give you tips to keep you on top of your health game. And ladies, let's face it, a critical tool as you age towards menopause and go through it gracefully. It will adjust your recommendations to keep your metabolism healthy through hormonal shifts so you can keep up your energy and stave off cravings. The key to metabolic health is something called metabolic flexibility. And that's where Lumen really shines. It refers to your body's ability to efficiently switch between using different fuel sources like carbs and fats. And there are preferred times to use each, and how well you can switch places you on that metabolic flexibility spectrum. So after getting to know you through your breath, Lumen gives you metabolic flex scores that you can track and improve on. So if you want to go take the next step with me in improving your health, go to lumen.me and use Fluster to get $100 off your Lumen. That's LUMEN.ME, and use Fluster at checkout for $100 off. Thanks, Lumen, for sponsoring this episode.
Moms, we're talking to you. You guys give 110% every day. I mean, you're running a household, you're trying to keep things organized, you've got kids going in this direction, you've got a partner going in another direction. So what do you need that's going to make you feel seen and make your life easier? Well, we've got it. It's called the Skylight Calendar.
The Skylight Calendar is a smart touch screen calendar, an organizer for all your chores, groceries, to-do lists, and a great way to manage appointments to make sure that they never overlap and that they're never missed. It helps keep busy households on track and everyone on the same page so families get their time back for moments that matter.
This has got features in it that make it intriguing and interesting and, dare I say, fun for kids to learn how to manage their time and to communicate with other people about schedules.
So kids love checking off their chores, watching their progress bar update, and you can get on-the-go access to everything with Skylight Calendar's mobile app.
Yep, and when the calendar's not in use, it turns into a digital picture frame. It's 100% satisfaction guaranteed. If you don't love the Skylight Calendar, then you'll receive a full refund. 120-day money-back guarantee, free returns.
As a special limited time offer for our listeners, get 15% off your purchase of a Skylight Calendar. Get 15% off your purchase of a Skylight Calendar when you go to skylightcal.com/Flusterclux. That's SKYLIGHTCAL.com/Flusterclux.
Mother's Day is coming right up, so order today and get 15% off your purchase at skylightcal.com/Flusterclux. Okay, we're back.
So you just described this pattern that we could have as children with our families, and then those children grow up to be lonely adults. So this is like a two-part, right? Because you're both a parent possibly listening, thinking of what you can do for your kids, which we talked about last week as well, but also you're thinking of your own loneliness too. How do you recognize that you have those patterns and stop them or pivot? What do you do?
Well, one of the things that happens when a child feels lonely and disconnected in a family, it generally means that they aren't really given room to express the way they feel. That when they do express the way they feel, or when they talk about what they like or what they don't like, or they're just sharing who they are, that they're generally either ignored or shut down. So there's not a lot of room for that kind of, what we might call vulnerability. There's not a lot of room for that emotional connection. It used to be long ago, right? Children are supposed to be seen and not heard. I think we've come a long way since then. But there are still adults that I talk to now where in their family, if they had a different opinion, if they were struggling with something, if they were feeling very sad about something, that there wasn't room for that. It's not necessarily, and don't think that this is a family that's like, horribly abusive and neglectful. Sometimes that was just kind of the norm in the family. The example I give all the time, which is a pretty dramatic one, is that when Jane Fonda's mother died by suicide, nobody ever mentioned it to her again. So your pet dies and you come home and nobody talks about it, or you are really sad about a breakup and somebody says, well, you know what? There are other fish in the sea. One of the things that connects us to people is when you're talking to somebody and they actually validate and understand and support and comfort you in your big uncomfortable feelings. So if you say, I'm really sad about this, and somebody says, well, that's nothing to be sad about. But if you're really sad about something and a person in your family, an adult says, you know what? I totally get it. I totally understand why you're sad.
And thank you for sharing that with me.
Yeah, I'm so glad you're telling me about that. When you don't have practice emotionally connecting to people and also just being vulnerable, like showing people how you feel inside, if that's shut down, you don't learn how to do that and you're not going to take that risk going forward. So then you get people who sort of have friendships that might be superficial. Maybe they have some fine relationships at work or activities, but they feel lonely because there's not that emotional connection. So you hang out with this person and you work with them, or maybe you play golf with them, or maybe you go on business trips with them. And then you find out after knowing them for 10 years that they have a child with special needs. Or you find out that they just went through a divorce, or you found out that their mom died of cancer when they were 5 and they went and lived with their uncle. And that has happened to me where I am sort of taken aback by how little that person shared, but it's usually because they weren't given permission to do that, or they did it and it didn't work and they shut it down.
As a parent, how would you rate that kitchen table dynamic? What would you say is a range of healthy that you like hearing that a family does?
The good, the bad, and the ugly, right? So I want them to be playful. I want them to talk about things. The one thing we want kids to be able to share things they're proud about without being given, that lecture of sort of like, well, who do you think you are? You're too big for your britches. That shuts kids down. So at the kitchen table, I want silliness. I want playfulness. I want shared celebration for things that happen. And then I also want kids to have room at the dinner table to talk about what was difficult during the day. I want a parent to be able to say, oh, God, that sounds terrible. How did you manage that? Or, oh, I can totally relate to that. So we want a range of emotions where they're sort of offering what is often called a bid for connection. So they're offering something to you and you are then accepting it and then offering them something back to them. And so that's what I want to happen at the dinner table.
I think some listeners could hear this and say, I think I have this with my kids, but I don't have this with my partner. There's such a range. There's a range of ideally you want that communication happening in all directions. But since this is more on adults too, and I know couples therapy isn't what you do per se, but at the same time, if you feel like you aren't going through the good, the bad, and the ugly, in a vulnerable way with your partner, how do you sort of try and start?
Well, I was actually listening to a talk by my friend Michelle, who is one of the country's leading couples therapists, but how it is that people express their love and express their connection and what works and what doesn't. And when you have a big incompatibility in a relationship, that's when people feel lonely. So say, for example, the way that you really feel loved and cared about is when somebody brings you gifts. They show up with something like, oh, I thought you'd want this or whatever. My husband went to a bakery this morning and I was like dealing with all this stressful stuff. And he said, I'm going to get you a scone. And I was like, no, don't get me a scone. And then I was on a meeting and he comes tiptoeing in with a scone and he just puts it on the desk next to me. Right. I said, like, don't bring me a scone. And he was like, I'm still going to bring you a scone. And it was just a sweet little gesture. Right. So that was his bid for connection. And so when you think about that in a relationship, the way we feel lonely is there's something that you want. There's something that you need that makes you feel connection and the other person doesn't give it to you. The homework assignment that I used to give to couples a lot was that I would have them make a cares list. One person would write down the 10 things that make them feel cared about. And then the other person would write down the 10 things that make them feel cared about and loved. And then you exchange lists. And for a period of time, like if you were in therapy with me, I would give you this as a homework assignment. And then for 2 weeks, you have to look at that list and do something off your partner's list every day. Because what happens oftentimes is we forget that what makes us feel cared about isn't what really works for the other person. And when you start shifting and thinking about what you're offering, that can really help and foster connection.
Most people in a couple have a different love language. I mean, I'm sure there are some couples where they both had the same thing. But I think it's also helpful to take a quiz like that and understand the pattern, because even though ideally the one person in the relationship consciously makes an effort to show love in the way they know their partner likes receiving it, sometimes you just show the love the way you feel sort of programmed. And in turn, when you recognize, so acts of service is not my love language, but your brother and my husband, he's programmed for acts of service. It's a big deal when I recognize that was an act of service. And even though that's not my love language, I always say that act of service, whatever it was he did, was a loving statement, wasn't it? And I appreciate that.
Is that what you say to him? Do you say, thank you for that act of service?
Well, I think I say...
I'm just teasing you. That was an awesome act of service, fella.
Well, sometimes it could seem like it's just a chore, but no, it was a loving thing. And I think that then in turn, acknowledging that and making sure that all those acts matter. And I would say outside of couples, I have a brother. He and I don't have a relationship the way you do with my husband. And I hope he doesn't listen to this podcast. But there was
the odds are low.
Yeah, the odds are really low. He's someone who doesn't show up very easily on the emotional front. And I'm all about, let's be authentically connected. And I recognized he's not going to show up the same way other adults in my life will. And I recognized that there is a certain pattern of how he wanted to show his love and care. And it was usually through material things. He wanted to show up with a bunch of gifts for my kids. And we're not really gift people. And there was a point when I was a parent that I realized he's never going to be able to show love the way I want him to. And if I can just accept that he's offering me love in his form, it was a really transformational shift where I used to get angry almost when he would show up with all these gifts because I was thinking of how he wasn't fulfilling my need. But instead, I was like delighted that isn't it nice that this is him showing up loving? So understanding how our family members can handle meeting us where we're at is kind of the key, right?
Yeah. And I use animals all the time. Like you hear me talk about if I'm talking to a child about their big anxiety reaction, I show them that video of the cat that's, to show the fight or flight. And it really is interesting sometimes when we talk about how animals show love in different ways. So say you had somebody who had a cat. How does that cat show its affection? Well, compared to how your dog shows affection, it's very different, which I've never had a bird, but I would imagine that birds show affection in a different way. So what we can do, we can use metaphors and we can use those kinds of examples to really broaden the way, like you say, to broaden the means of connection, to broaden our bids of connection. There's differences in the way that we're raised. There are differences in the way that our families showed it. Some people learn it better than others. You, as a person, are very, very good at connecting by having difficult conversations, right? Like you're like, let's talk about it.
Oh, me, yes.
You, Robin, right? You, right? You're very willing. Like, let's connect by having this difficult conversation.
Can I talk about something that I know you would want to talk about? And I want to say that as a parent and as a wife, one of the things that I have learned, the most powerful thing I can leverage and connection with other people is my full attention. And I think that when we were talking about when our relationships might feel a little strained in our families, well, you've talked about the therapist who recommends a daily walk, no screens. But even if it's like, let's just sit together 30 minutes and just for 30 minutes, no screens, no interruptions.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's often the case with friendships too. You know, if we talk about the loneliness and feeling connected to friends, that often is the case. I mean, when I go hiking with my friends, which is one of the activities that I love to do and I love to do with my friends, it's just the two of us. My friend Christine, who I talk about all the time, we went for a hike. So she picks me up at my house. We drive to the White Mountains. We hike all day. We get back to the car. We drive home. We were together for 10 hours, we calculated, and we did not stop talking. And it was the full attention. We were having conversations for 10 hours. And it was just so wonderful. There was no distraction. I mean, there were other people around. Hello. And I said, hi. But it was 10 hours of she giving me her full attention and vice versa. It was just so nice.
How full did you feel after that too?
Oh, just as full as can be.
Yeah.
We were kind of surprised, but not really. We were like, we just talked for 10 hours. I think that probably one of the things that makes people feel lonely, if we're talking about loneliness in relationships, is that we don't set aside that time or we don't engage in activities in which we're really talking to each other.
I would agree. And I would say that you don't actually have to make that connection with someone in your family or one of your close friends, because since I am a little extroverted,
A little,
I've had phenomenal connecting conversations with people outside of my home and like normal daily things. If you're sitting next to someone on an airplane or another mom at a playground or whatever, I've had incredible conversations that weren't about the weather.
Right.
Yeah, I'm not very good at talking about the weather, except with my friend who's a meteorologist. So I think that that's important to note, that connection can be found kind of wherever you look for it.
Yes. And you can practice it. If you are seeking connection, if you are somebody listening to this and feeling like, oh God, I am lonely or I have struggled with loneliness, maybe we come back and I'm going to give you some of my tried and true tips for being able to step into that connection place and maybe help you with your loneliness. You just gave a great one. I got some more too.
Well, I just would want to point out that you or I have definitely experienced loneliness, despite the fact that we're extroverts, despite the fact that we sort of aren't shy and we reach out and we have relationships. Loneliness can happen to everyone.
Yep. It can happen to everyone. And it can happen in one group and not another group. Absolutely.
We all know what it's like to be busy and to try and organize everybody's schedule. How easy is it to double book yourself? So Skylight Calendar actually is the perfect gift for busy moms, right? Who don't want to drop the ball, who don't want to double book themselves. The Skylight Calendar is a smart touchscreen calendar. It's an organizer for all your chores, your groceries, your to-do lists. It helps keep busy households on track. It syncs events from existing family calendars. You can hook it up to Google and Apple and your Outlook calendar. You can add events directly using the touchscreen or with the free Skylight mobile app. It's available in 2 sizes. We've got the 10-inch and the 15-inch. The 15-inch is wall mountable. How cool is that? When the calendar is not in use, you can turn it into a digital picture frame. 100% satisfaction guaranteed. If you don't love the Skylight calendar, you get a full refund. 120-day money-back guarantee, free returns. Can't beat it. So, as a special time-limited offer for our listeners, get 15% off your purchase of a Skylight calendar when you go to skylightcal.com/Flusterclux. That's skylightcal.com/Flusterclux. Mother's Day is coming right up, so order today to get 15% off your purchase at skylightcal.com/Flusterclux. Okay, file this under the category of what will they think of next? Songfinch is this incredible service that allows you to create original radio quality songs that are inspired by your own life and the people you love. Maybe you're planning a proposal. Maybe you want to create a song for somebody for your anniversary. Maybe it's for Mother's Day. Maybe it's for Father's Day. You give some personal information, and then a very talented musical artist creates a song just for you. And what a thoughtful gift. I mean, for those people that have everything, this is going to delight them and surprise them. Maybe there's a graduation coming up, Mother's Day, Father's Day. So start your song now to lock in a top Songfinch artist. So for a limited time, Songfinch is letting our listeners upload their songs to Spotify for free. So you and the lucky person you gift it to can listen to it anywhere, anytime. So go to songfinch.com/Fluster and start your song. After you purchase, you'll be prompted to add Spotify streaming for your original song for free, a $50 value. Again, it's songfinch.com/Fluster. Don't forget to share your song with us too. songfinch.com/Fluster. Okay, so now back to the show. Okay, so you were just saying that loneliness happens to everybody. So then I'm just having like this, I'm going through the sad reel of my life of all the times I was rejected and felt lonely. We talked about one of them in the previous loneliness episode, but man, there's a lot of them, aren't they? I mean, we all have those periods of just feeling disconnected and lonely.
I think we were all seeking connection. We've talked about this in other episodes. When other people are reaching for connection, whether it's normal connection or romantic connection, everyone's ultimately rooting for everybody else. This is a human need.
Right. It is a basic human need. I mean, as I've said many times, when we want to torture somebody, we put them in solitary confinement. We are hardwired. We are social beings. We are hardwired to connect. And when this is disrupted, when we can't get it, when we're seeking it and it's not there, it's incredibly painful and incredibly common. People walk in here spinning, and then they get an hour of my full attention. And my goal is for them to feel differently when they leave.
Well, I could do it for like 5 minutes, so I really admire you.
Yeah, well, I get paid too. But that's really what my hope is. That's what my job is. I remember somebody saying early in my career, this other therapist saying, you know what, if I don't make my client cry, I don't feel like it was a successful session.
Whoa.
And I was like,
whoa,
that's effed up, man.
Yeah.
Yeah. My job is not to increase your distress. It's to increase your sense of connection. And it might be with me, but oftentimes I am a significant person that is modeling connection for them. I do these really fun groups with educators, a lot of school counselors, and I was just doing one this morning. And one of the school counselors was just describing a very, very difficult situation that she's dealing with. And I said to her, I know you're trying to fix this and you're trying to figure out what you're supposed to say and how you're supposed to handle the parents, et cetera, et cetera. When this kid comes into school, You're her connection. She is coming to see you and feel connection. And that counts towards so much, right? I mean, you can try and figure out how to solve all these problems, which most of them the school counselor was not going to be able to solve. But it really was about this kid coming in and making a bid for connection and being pretty vulnerable and telling this school counselor things that she wasn't talking about with other people. It's really pretty amazing.
The gift of attention, the gift of connection that you're giving is modeling and teaching at the same time, the most important base skills. I think that's so cool.
Well, part of it is you think about anxiety and depression are internalizing disorders, right? That means we do them on the inside. So if somebody comes for therapy, I don't want to go inside and just spend all the time inside. We need to get them externally connected. We need to get them outside of their heads, not deeper in their heads. So a lot of times it is really about, how do I help you connect? When you leave here, how do I help you develop the relationships and the connections that you are seeking? I feel like that's a lot of what I do. With anxious people and depressed people, they are pulled inside themselves. They're like turtles with their heads inside their shells. And I am trying to get them to open up and look around and see what the world offers, because the world is a scary place for them.
Right. And I can think of what person I know, and the temptation is you just can think if you think hard enough and long enough. You talk about this in the anxiety audit, but if you just think long enough and hard enough, you're going to think your way out of. Mm-hmm. It doesn't work that way.
It doesn't work that way. You've got to connect with other people. The thing that disrupts our patterns, particularly if they're internal patterns, is having some outside influence come in there and shake them up, right? So imagine that you're just sitting on your couch all day thinking about what ugly loser you are, or how you're incompetent, or how this or how that, and you don't go out into the world to get any evidence to the contrary. And then finally you go out into the world and somebody is like, hey, I love your shoes, or God, you did a great job on that, or hey, I read that poem that you wrote. I mean, there's just all of these ways in which we make people feel connected. We were going to come back from the break and I was going to give some tips. Here's the first tip. If you are feeling lonely and if you are feeling disconnected, there is a good chance that you are spending a lot of time inside of yourself talking to you about you and not getting any outside input, outside evidence, outside contact. It is really, really helpful if you are feeling lonely to find a way to give of yourself. We think of loneliness as I need somebody to fill up my emptiness. But there's an interesting thing that happens when we take ourselves and we offer that to other people.
Yes.
Metaphorically speaking, you are going to offer, and that's why we know, as I've said so many times, that volunteerism is such a great way to deal with depression and to deal with loneliness, is that you're offering something of yourself. And then, of course, you get feedback that does fill you up, that does help break that pattern. The other tip, too, is that I want people to recognize that there are different levels of connection. And sometimes when I'm talking to somebody who's lonely, they will say to me, well, you know what? I am just not going to engage in small talk. I'm just not going to, that is just so superficial. And I really want to have deep and meaningful connection. And I'm not going to do that. Well, the reality of it is that there are many, many people in the world that I am going to only engage in small talk with. That there are very few people in this world that I am going to get into the deepest, most meaningful conversations. But the way that I found those people is I started with small talk. My friend Christine, who I talked to for 10 hours straight, when we first met each other, it was small talk. It was figuring out what we had in common. It was chit chat. We didn't dive right into, the frustration we felt of being parents, or we didn't dive right into whatever it is that we talked about for 10 hours this summer. Give yourself the chance to engage in small talk, because that's the door that opens things. And when you shut that down and when you say you're not going to do that, you're missing out on opportunities. And then closely related to this is that I totally get that if you've experienced loneliness for a period of time, if you grew up lonely, if you feel like you don't fit in, if you tried to connect and it hasn't worked, that it's really easy for you to give up. One of the things I hear actually when I'm talking to young adults that are struggling with this is that they really believed that they in their youth were going to make their strongest connections. This even happens to kids when I say kids, but they're young adults like that are juniors or seniors in college, and they're feeling kind of hopeless about the fact that they don't have really strong connections because their perception based on social media, based on popular culture, based on movies, based on songs, is that this is where you make all the strongest connections. I am here to tell you, if you are listening to this, is that incredibly strong, powerful, genuine, deep, vulnerable connections are possible at any time in your life. And the goal at this point is to keep at it and to really work on recognizing what you say to yourself that keeps you from taking that risk. Now, I use the word risk on purpose because it is absolutely risky to put yourself out there, because there is a risk that you will suffer rejection again. There is a risk that you may do a bid for connection and it gets rebuffed. This is a risky thing, but you've got to be patient and you've got to be consistent and you've got to find your tribe. Just like I said with the kids, the more you increase the traffic flow of different people coming in and out of your orbit, the more likely it is that you're going to find people that you can connect with. Be patient. Relationships develop over time. There's a lot of myths about relationships. Oh, we met in 1 second. We knew we were going to be best friends. We just hit it off. I hear that all the time. That's not generally the case. So give yourself some time, be patient, and allow yourself to take the risk. I know it's risky, but you've got to recognize that this is something that's an active process that you work on over time.
So one thing I think is interesting, and obviously I can't pose this question back to you because your family is also my family now and people listen.
Hi, people.
Right. But one thing that I will say that I think is kind of my life experience is that when I was growing up, I definitely didn't have a lot in common with my other family members. So I always had this thing of like, I was a little different than most of the people in my family. It was still a very loving family. So I will say that. However, as I got older and I was a college student or a young adult, while I never really liked our family's dinner conversation around the table, it was like too banal to me. We never talked about anything that I would consider real or important the way I sought friends who did like talking about that sort of stuff. So I made an effort. While I did not like our family's culture, I remember individually making an effort to get to know each of my family members as a person on their own. And I would say that you're never too old to start those types of relationships where you seek out those one-on-one connections.
Yeah, I think that happens a lot with siblings. You know, there are so many dynamics in a family with siblings. And then once you're out on your own and you begin to figure out who you are and you have connections that are separate from that whole family unit, I think that absolutely happens for sure. The earlier, the better, but it's never too late. And seeking connection and finding people that have things that you have in common, that are interesting to you, people that you just enjoy being around, it's an active process. And you can keep adding people. You can get rid of people. That's the other thing about connection. You don't have to hang on to somebody if it's just not working, right? You could let a friendship go as you grow out of it. But loneliness, remember, it's a perception that everybody has what you want and that you can't get it. You know, if you're listening to this and you feel like you are feeling lonely or if you felt lonely, I want you to just recognize that, one, you're not alone in your loneliness, ironically, but it is about bids for connection. And you're going to have to force yourself sometimes to do it, even when you don't feel like it. There's a big payoff.
So, Lynn, speaking of connection, are you up to date on Ted Lasso?
Oh, I'm so up to date. So we're recording this on a Thursday. So yesterday I'm going through my day and then all of a sudden I was like, it's Ted Lasso day. I was so excited. So yeah.
For those who watched it before, I thought this season started really, really lame. And I thought, oh, they lost it. But I promise it picks up.
Yeah. I didn't think that it started lame. But then once you told me that you thought it started lame, then I was sort of feeling like maybe, did it start lame? I'm not sure, but I don't care. And I love Roy Kent, and I can't get enough of Brett is going around doing, the guy who plays Roy Kent is going around doing all these interviews. And he did this great interview on, I think on Seth Meyers, maybe. Oh, no, on Stephen Colbert, where he's talking about his mom, texting his mom while his mom was watching him in some movie. Yeah. So my sister said that maybe he's taking the place of Hugh Grant in our hearts because we have this thing for Hugh Grant.
Oh, wow. If he only knew what a compliment that was based on how big that place in your heart is.
It's a big place.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and actually, as we're going into May, you always talk about May being one of the most challenging months for families. So how about a little bit of first of all, why? And then second of all, how about a little May pep talk?
Yeah. So one of the reasons that May is so challenging is because, for one, the grown-ups are psyched that it's May. You're like, yay, it's May. And it's sort of the end of the school year and everybody's got, spring fever and yay, it's May. But also at the end of the school year, if you have a little child or even a big child who tends to be a little worried, May is the time of year in the school year where all the change is talked about, but it's still very abstract. The end of the school year, we're going to say goodbye. We start having end of the year rituals. The teachers start taking down the bulletin boards. We're talking about going to the next school. You're having your visiting day in your classroom. And the little anxious people amongst us don't like all of the uncertainty. So there's a lot of energy, a lot of juice that goes into May. And it sort of gets things a little revved up in a way that's surprising. So now you've been warned. If things are a little wonky in May, take a deep breath and just remember that it's normal, and you want to talk to your kids about how normal it is to feel uncertain when all of this change is being talked about. It's totally normal. That's my pep talk. Was it peppy enough?
It was very smart. I mean, how peppy can you be if you're like, okay, so some of your households are going to be going through a lot of crazy stuff?
Right. So that's why I did say take a deep breath. But just know that it's normal. Just know that it's normal. So this is your little dose of it's going to be okay, people. This is the of course talk. Maybe we shouldn't have said it was a pep talk. Maybe that was asking too much. Okay.
Thanks for listening. And if you found this podcast helpful, please give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. It helps other people find this information.
And if you'd like to dig deeper on any of these topics, we have specialized playlists on our Spotify profile, and the link is in the show notes. Topics like teens, depression, and OCD. Bye, Lynn.
Bye, Robin.
If you're a parent, I invite you to join us at the Mindful Mama podcast, where it's all about becoming a less irritable, more joyful parent. With sometimes hilarious and always thought-provoking experts and friends, at Mindful Mama, we know that you cannot give what you do not have. And when you have calm and peace within, then you can give it to your children. I'm Hunter Clark Fields, and I can't wait to see you there. Listen in to the Mindful Mama podcast.